Hi.
Hi.
I'm so glad that you're here.
I know, I'm excited.
I cannot wait. So we have been in a sermon series called Dynamic Duos, and I've been sitting down with all of our pastors talking about some of the duos that we're going to be breaking down as the series goes on. So, Sarah, can you tell me a little bit about who your duo is and what their story is?
Yeah, my dynamic duo is Mary and Elizabeth.
Nice. So
they are relatives, and they both find themselves pregnant at the same time in very different circumstances. So basically, we have Mary, the mother of God, Jesus. And she is encountered by an angel, and this angel tells her about what's about to happen. And she's about to give birth to the child of God, and she will name him Jesus. And about at the same time, we have Elizabeth, who also has received a message from God, who will, she will also be having a son, and his name will be John. And she's much older than Mary, though. Mary is young, probably 12 or 13, and Elizabeth is in her later years, and it says, like, beyond what she thought was going to be able to have, like, a baby. But here she is, pregnant, and they decide, like, so Mary then comes and visits Elizabeth, and to kind of like go through it together. And when she arrives at their house, Elizabeth's baby jumps for joy in her womb because John already knew the presence of Christ within Mary. So there's this really cool dynamic between both of them. They hang out for the last 3 months of Elizabeth's pregnancy, and Mary eventually goes home once John is believed to have been born because he's a little bit older than Jesus. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. Oh, and we also have the Magnificat in there, which is Mary accepting this, gift from God.
Yeah. I am so excited to talk about this pairing because I think there's so many layers to it that are really special and really interesting, especially because, I mean, not only is this a duo that's centered around women in scripture who hold like significant and prominent roles within the story of Jesus, but even their relationship to each other, not just as cousins, but as like women navigating pregnancy together in different stages of life with different experiences. Like, I think that that's really interesting. What are some of the things about either these characters or the story as a whole that you've been kicking around as you've been putting your sermon together?
The story as a whole, I've just been thinking about the significance of these two women experiencing pregnancy together, especially since, like, usually in these mentor kind of relationships like we see with Mary and Elizabeth, like where someone's significantly older and significantly younger, it's because the older person has gone through a bunch of life experience before and can help guide that younger person. However, Elizabeth doesn't have any children yet, so this is her first time too, and that's something I've really been thinking about, is how they're both going through this, like, incredible experience for the first time together at both very different stages in their life. And I also think it's significant too that, like, Elizabeth comes from like a prominent, faithful family. She's the daughter of Aaron, I think, the priest, and like, so they're known to be like a pretty, like, I mean, well-to-do isn't like the exact word, but like a good, faithful family. And Mary's family is actually like not like as held in high regard too. So there's just some, like, a lot of interesting dynamics between the family standings themselves, their ages, just a lot going on, and about the significance of who they're carrying.
Yeah.
So, like, Mary is quite literally the bearer of God, like, and carrying Jesus, and then Elizabeth is carrying John the Baptist. So these are two big names that we see, obviously, in the New Testament. And so, yeah, I think that's some of the layers of their relationship.
It is really interesting. And you think about, kind of like you were talking about, the age dynamic and what can be perceived as a power dynamic between an older and younger individual. And yet, like, the younger individual is carrying what could be argued as like the most significant human to like ever be born, right? Jesus Christ. And Mary's carrying, or Elizabeth is carrying John the Baptist, who will go on to like announce the coming of Christ, and like
right, which I even read too, and like I was in my research, I thought was interesting that like even so John. His big intro is like, I'm coming to prepare the way, right? And like even from before he's born, he's doing that. So like he's jumping for joy whenever Jesus enters through Mary's womb, and he's already like announcing and preparing the way, which I thought was a cool take. But that
I love that.
I digress.
No, I think that's super interesting, and the fact that they got to go through that together. There's something about like the way in which I think women support each other. That is really significant in that story. Women
supporting women.
Yeah, I think that's super cool.
Yes.
Is there anything kind of within each of the characters that has stuck out to you? Because both of them have really well-formed like storylines within scripture that are like really cool. And so what kind of stuck out within the characters?
Oh my gosh. A lot of things that like I probably won't super touch on in the sermon but like for Mary in particular, something I've really been thinking about is just her consent in this situation with like receiving this news and like the power dynamics there, her age, and then also I came across the idea that Catholics, their doctrine says that Mary is a perpetual virgin, which means that they believe that she was always a virgin through her entire life, which is really interesting considering Jesus does have siblings, and just the idea that, so there's a lot in there too that I could kind of like go into. I think that she just has a lot of layers, and I think people put a lot of things on her because she is the bearer of God, and so a lot of times to make that something that quote unquote a woman can do, we have to put all these stipulations and like oh well, she never had sex,
right?
So it's okay,
She just stayed that way forever.
She just stayed.
Had a lot of divine children. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's really interesting. Like this, I had a little, like, it's just a really big point of contention, her virginity, which is really interesting. Like why that's such a, big thing, especially after Christ has already been like, because I know, that Christ's born of a virgin. That's in our own doctrine as well. But like after that, it's like why does that need to stay? It's almost like Mary was not solely selected because she hadn't had sex, because I think that would reduce her faith down to her sex life. And it makes it seem as though the only reason that Mary deserves to be honored is because she was a virgin and not because she carried the literal Son of God. Like, I think that's why we're honoring her.
Yeah.
Not because she was 12 and hadn't had sex yet. So, yeah.
I think you raise a really great point that like it is very easy, I think, when we read some of these stories that are so rich with context and complexity and symbolism that we might not recognize because they're existing in a time that we're not familiar with anymore.
Yes.
That it's easy for us to kind of cling to what we see at the surface level of the story and then like reduce the character down to those things. When, Mary like is a very complex person. Like, she lived a full life and was able to navigate the like emotional weight of being the mother of Jesus.
Yes.
And what that looked like throughout the course of her life. And, I think you kind of mentioned this in another conversation too, because the conversation around consent is a really big one. It's a hard one to have because there are so many layers to this. But, there is kind of this element of recognition that, there is a dialogue that we see unfolding.
Yes.
And opportunity to respond to what is being asked. And that is not necessarily the case in other forms of lore that surround the time.
Exactly. In a lot of other like ancient texts that involve like any sort of relationship with a god and a human, the consent is just like non-existent. Especially in like Greek mythology, you see a lot of non-consensual things happening, which I think is so significant about our text in that there is gray area, there is conversation and a dialogue. Like I've always imagined the angel to kind of like sit down with Mary and have this conversation. And one article I was reading even said that like maybe this angel appeared to her in the form of a man, rather than like a whole, multi-eyed angel, which could have informed her response too. Because I think the angel does say, "Don't be afraid," but like her response even isn't super fearful. Like she's already kind of in a position of like conversation and acceptance. And I also think it's significant too. Mary, like a lot of times, Mary can be understood as like kind of submissive or something like that, but I don't think that's the case at all. I think that Mary's discerning and wise. She's often described as perplexed, wondering, pondering, or holding things close to her heart. That is not somebody who's submissive. That's somebody who is really, really pondering these things that God has laid on their heart. And I think that's part of the reason that she was kind of like selected.
Yeah. I mean, there's a strength to that.
Yes.
Like, you have to be able to discern and interpret. And especially as that story goes on, like, you've got to be like, can I trust that my betrothed really did have a dream that this is a thing? And can I trust that we really do have to flee? And can I trust that, like, this is what I'm like?
Yeah.
You have to have some resiliency to be able to do that. So yeah, I think that that's really interesting. And, Elizabeth has a lot of really interesting pieces to her story too.
Oh, Elizabeth. Yes.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, like I said, she is like from a family of like religious leaders in this society. So like, I mean, even Zechariah is like, he's, I forget his actual title, but he works in the temple, and like, I think it's funny. He receives like a whole vision too, and he actually questions the angel, and the angel's just like not having it.
He's like, actually, you're like, not going to talk anymore.
Yeah, he's like, that's enough. And Zechariah is then, he becomes mute until John is born. Actually, even after John is born, he does not become unmute until John is born. Elizabeth says this baby's name is John. All the other people are like, that's impossible. And then Zechariah writes, this is John. And then he's on mute. I just think that's funny. Anyways, I digress. Elizabeth, though, comes from that family and like has been very faithful all her life, is married to Zechariah, does not have any children. She's been barren until John in her old age. So both of them, Zechariah and Elizabeth, were righteous before God, this is from Scripture, and living blamelessly according to all the commandments and regulations of the Lord. So something I found interesting about this was that barrenness does not equate unfaithfulness. So I think a lot of times Scripture can be used in a harmful way towards women who are not able to give birth. And like we see this a lot, and even like within Scripture, sometimes it's like it seems to be equated with like, oh, you're so faithful, then you will be fruitful. But I don't think that is the case. And we see that here with Elizabeth having had a faithful life, but still not having children until later. So I think that is an important distinction. I don't think it's like a result of one or the other, but rather just the way our bodies are made. And that is, they're always made beautifully and whole, even if that is not a possibility. But yeah, I think there's also something funny to me when you talk about the fact that Zechariah was mute until he like agreed. And what's interesting in that story is that like she says, this is what his name is. And it's not until he affirms her voice that he gets his back. Yes.
And I love that.
Yes.
Like, there's a lot about that in how these two women relate to each other, where you see the men in their life having to adjust their path and their dream and their vision of where they're going to the will of God in the lives of their wives.
Yes, we see the men submitting to their wife.
Yeah,
and it's a two-way street.
Yeah, and that's like not a thing that you get, you know, because you have like Zachariah having to elevate Elizabeth's voice and to affirm that that's what they're doing because she has said so. Or like with Mary, like Joseph literally, God having to be like, actually, no, you're not going to do that because this is what she's doing and you're going to do it too. And like he becomes at the will of his wife because she is carrying the Son of God. Like those are really, I think, interesting dynamics as well within a patriarchal system.
Yes.
Where you see these women like, forcing that.
Are constantly things like in this story that are just flipped. Like Mary is, like I said, the one that doesn't have as high of a standing in society, but yet she's the one carrying the Son of God. And like both of them are women, so like usually the man is the one that would be listened to, but then God has flipped that again. It's almost like God sides with the people that society often puts to the side. Yeah. God be doing that, you know?
They do be doing that.
But also another thing that I thought was interesting too about Elizabeth being barren is that she said it was the people who disgraced her about not having children, not God. That's in Luke. It was the like people in the society and community that was making her feel lower and less accepted because she hadn't had children yet. Had nothing to do with her relationship with God, but rather her community putting a certain set of standards on her, which, yeah, that's just another tangent. But I also think it's cool, too, that, like, she doesn't question God's plan. Mary doesn't really question God's plan. They both, like, well, Mary has questions within it, but she doesn't, like, she's like, you know, she's not like, no way.
They're like very informed. Yeah. Like logistically, how is this actually going to go down?
It's logistics. Mary's like, okay, that's fine, but like how?
And you know what? Fair enough.
Yeah, that's valid. That's a valid question, Mary. I would ask the same.
In general, when you think about the dynamic of these two women and their relationship to each other, kind of as a closing thought, like why does their relationship matter to us today?
Ooh, yeah, I think their relationship matters so much because it highlights for us just the importance of kind of like shared experience and the importance of having a support system around you and like in these huge transitions in life. Like those are ginormous transitions for both Mary and Elizabeth, and to have one another to go through this same thing together and also have faith and God be at the center is huge and can be an example for us when we're going through large transitions and have never been through it before, just to the importance of having that support and community too.
Yeah. I think that that's great. Yeah. Awesome. Well, Sarah, thank you so much.
Of course.
For chatting with us. You can catch this full... Wait. Was that what I wanted to say? Was it? How do I close this? Hang on.
Think.
I've actually completely forgotten. Oh, okay. Hang on.
Okay.
We're just going to cut back into that. Well, Sarah, thank you so much.
Of course.
This was awesome. You can catch the sermon that goes along with this week on the Gathering app at gatheringnow.org and on our YouTube channel. Be sure to check that out at some point this week, and we will catch you later.
Whoop, whoop.